Good afternoon. Thanks for coming out today for this special conversation about our budget and our enrollment. I'm very appreciative that you all took the time to do that, and I see that we're at full capacity here. I think there are a few more folks out in the hallway or in an overflow room. So again, thank you for taking the time out to come today. I want to give a special thank you to Commissioner Christian, Regent Fran Albrecht from Missoula here, and Regent Asa Holman, who is one of our own law students and is the student regent. Thank you for coming as well. The purpose of this talk today is to inform the campus of actions that we will take to align our enrollment and our financial resources at the University of Montana and to position ourselves for the future. I'm going to approach this talk in 4 sections. First, I'll talk about the realities of our enrollment, so we're all dealing with the same set of numbers. Second, I'll talk about the financial implications of those numbers and specific budgetary actions that we're going to be taking. Third, I want to talk about some immediate steps related to our recruitment and admissions process. And 4, the longer-term adjustments to our programming that will strengthen us both financially and academically. Central to this conversation is the imperative to maintain fiscal responsibility, to reinforce the exceptional quality in education, research, and service for which we are known, and to ensure the well-being of our students. So first, let's turn to the enrollment reality. I'll take about 20 minutes to make some comments, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. So at the present time, we have an enrollment of just over 13,000 head count and just under 11,000 full-time equivalents. That follows a peak head count of 15,400 that we saw in 2011, followed by a steady decline since then. The peak itself occurred after a dramatic climb in enrollment from 2008 through 2011. So we are currently at approximately the same enrollment levels now as we were pre-recession. I won't dwell in detail on the specific reasons for our enrollment decline, but I do want to establish that multiple factors have been at play. These include at least the following. First, our own recruiting challenges in the face of increasing competition. Second, a declining Montana demographic excuse me, of college-going students. Third, the multiple effects of the economic recession and its recovery that played out first in moving students into higher education as jobs became scarce, then the opposite effect as job availability returned, and afterwards students migrating toward majors perceived to be more directly connected to jobs. The fourth factor I think has been at play is our ongoing visibility around the topic of sexual assault. These are not excuses, they are reasons. I don't know the relative contribution of those 4 factors, and each of us can likely argue the importance of one over the other. But they've all played a role in getting us to the reality of our current enrollment situation. So moving to financial alignment, our general fund budget is built almost entirely on enrollment-based revenue sources. First, the regental allocation of the dollars appropriated by the legislature, and second, the tuition paid by our students. During the years of the steep enrollment increase, we added personnel to the university's workforce, over 400 full-time equivalents of addition, both faculty and otherwise, to meet the needs of our students. With the subsequent decline in enrollment, we're now in a personnel-heavy state, if you will, with more employees than our revenue sources can support, and too much of our available money spent on people, leaving an insufficient amount for operating expenses. We have decreased our base personnel numbers only modestly in recent years, and up to this point, we've used mostly temporary measures to make expenditures and revenues align. We cannot continue in that temporary mode, so it's time to adjust our base budget for alignment with our enrollment. We're not a business, but we do need to operate on sound business practices, and that requires that expenses align with revenues. So how should we adjust our personnel base? We have 2 parameters to guide us: national norms for institutions of our type, and our own history from more stable enrollment times. Going forward, we will therefore set a faculty number based on a student-to-faculty ratio of 18:1, and those are full-time equivalent calculations. That also correlates with spending at least 50% of our budget on instruction. We'll set our non-faculty workforce using a non-faculty to faculty ratio of 1.4:1. So that 18:1 faculty ratio will ensure high-quality education that we are known for, because that is really the standard around the country, that 18:1. And the non-faculty numbers will provide the staff necessary for proper support. Both of these ratios are more favorable than what we had in pre-recession years, and they are more favorable than what we had during our peak enrollment time period. At our current enrollment of 10,915 full-time equivalents, that faculty number using that 18:1 ratio comes out to 606. The non-faculty number to 849. Those targets will require reductions from our current staffing levels of 52 faculty lines and 149 non-faculty lines. The latter number including the categories of staff, contract professionals, including administrators, student employees, and graduate assistants. So again, if you want to look at these numbers, we had ramped up pretty aggressively in most of those employee categories during the growth years. Yeah, go ahead, Rebecca. Yeah. So you see here, pre-recession numbers in the years prior to the recession, we had a student FTE that hovered around 11,900. And at that time, we had 1,340 employees in our workforce. At our peak condition around 2011, we had, you can see the student FTE, 13,917, and we had ramped up quite a bit, as I said, over 400 employees to get to that 1,748. Now we have the enrollment at 10,915, and what I'm budgeting for, what I'm telling you here, would be an enrollment force of 1,455. So again, note that this total employee number for FY17 is still significantly larger than in pre-recession days where we had similar or even a little bit bigger enrollment. And that number has to be bigger today. The 1,455 has to be bigger for a couple of reasons. First, we were significantly understaffed back in those pre-recession days. And secondly, our responsibilities in terms of student services or compliance areas are much greater today than they were in the past. So these adjustments to that 1,455 will address our current structural budget situation and again ensure that we're spending 50% of our money on instruction. The decreases in employee numbers will be made through a combination of what I'll call opportunistic measures, that is normal attrition, but more importantly through strategic decisions. And so these actions are summarized in this table, this next table, so I want to go through this with you in some detail. There are 7 categories of actions listed down the left-hand side, and then the numbers of faculty and non-faculty employees that will be assigned to each of those action categories, if you will. So first of all, we have a number of open lines, and so we'll capture some of those open lines. The numbers that you see there reflect a portion of the open lines that are out there in the academic areas or out there in the non-academic areas. There are currently about 50 faculty open lines on campus and about 30 open non-faculty lines, but we're not going to capture all of those through that mechanism, but we will capture the numbers that I've shown there. Secondly, enrollment-based adjustments. Certain academic programs are essential to our mission and our identity, but they have experienced significant enrollment reductions and are therefore slated for staffing adjustments on a program-by-program basis. So these include a set of programs that I'll list off here: journalism, anthropology, English, geography, liberal studies, art, political science, forestry management, and the Missoula College programs of carpentry, building maintenance, and recreational power equipment. The deans will work together collectively within that set of programs to identify where these specific numbers will come from. Now, reductions in teaching faculty in those areas will require some enforcement on the part of the deans with respect to several parameters. Class size limits will be increased in certain cases, maintaining compliance with accreditors, of course, and with health safety concerns in those areas where applicable. Minimum class sizes will be enforced where needed. Tenured and tenure-track faculty will take on a little more responsibility for teaching of lower division coursework in some areas. More courses will need to be offered during expanded hours and evenings to accommodate the needs of students and to gain efficiencies in our physical resources like classrooms. Online offerings will be increased. And we will exercise all reasonable flexibility, of course, to ensure that students are not unduly affected. The third category, graduate assistants. During our growth period, we added about 78 teaching assistants, again, in terms of full-time equivalents, to staff increased numbers of sections. And so we're going to decrease that number in part of the assistants that are funded by the general fund. And so you can see the number here, 29, is the number of graduate assistants that will decrease in the general fund. Some of those graduate students may be able to be picked up on indirect cost revenue or some foundation funds on occasion, but they will be removed from the general fund source. Number 4 is the category of part-time and other employees. We employ quite a few people on a part-time basis year to year, and a number of student employees as well, as you all know. And so we're going to capture some of those employees, 24 to be exact. We have specific actions to downsize the administration by 5 positions, including eliminating the graduate dean, which we've already done, the merging of the alumni office with integrated communications, which is underway, and facilities administration's decreases, which are underway as well. The 6th area, academic program consolidation elimination. Some programs are no longer enrolling at a level that allows keeping them, at least in their current configuration. Programs that will be closed or undergo serious reconfiguration include energy technology, electronics technology, the graduate programs in foreign languages, consolidation of recreation management and resource conservation graduate programs, and consolidation of the broadcast and journalism degrees into a single journalism degree. Again, the deans will work within that sphere of programs and within that number parameter to make the specific decisions. Support program consolidation will take place to some extent as well, and those will be adjustments to staffing in certain research centers, some of the research center staff that are now on general fund dollars, reductions in library staffing, in athletics, reduction to the School of Extended and Lifelong Learning, and consolidation of several units under the title of academic enrichment, including the Office of Civic Engagement and Career Services. And finally, combining foreign student services into international programs. So again, within those sets of programs and within those numerical parameters, we'll work to identify the specific actions that take place. Well, let me look forward now and talk about enrollment management in the immediate term, our recruiting and marketing steps. We're making a number of changes in our recruiting structure to attract more students. These actions will play out to some degree even in the current recruiting cycle. We've launched a search for a reconfigured position, Vice President for Enrollment Management and Student Affairs. This national search will produce an individual who has demonstrated effectiveness in modern recruiting and admission strategies and who can build a highly productive team. The search is set up to bring the new person on this spring, and it will be a replacement for our current Vice President for Student Affairs, Teresa Branch, who we know is retiring. We have made and will continue to make specific changes in recruiting methodologies. For example, we now have a state-of-the-art enrollment management software package. We have we've adjusted name buys for non-resident prospects, in particular in a more targeted and strategic market. We completely revamped our prospect contact protocol to increase the frequency and quality of the contacts with prospective students, and we have all new materials that we send those prospects. We have in place the We Are Montana tour, which brings teams of faculty, administrators, and recruiters to key cities and towns across Montana and beyond the state. At each site, the team meets with students, teachers, administrators, news media, alumni, and others. We've established the Broader Impacts Group, which serves both as a research outreach effort, but also as a recruiting effort for the university. That group is conducting over 50 classroom visits by stellar faculty and graduate students this fall, and they've launched the STEM Fest program, a virtual interaction that puts high school students in contact with professionals and academics in the science and math fields. Our general marketing continues to evolve in both message and delivery, focusing on our exceptional academic offerings, campus vitality, and our host community and surroundings. We're making more use of a variety of marketing channels encompassing television, social media, print materials. Customer service is going to be central in both our admissions processes and our on-campus services to students. We will increase our focus on this critical area collectively. Let me turn to enrollment management in the long-term sense, that is, programmatic alignment. In the long term, we must adjust our academic portfolio to be increasingly attractive, relevant, and outcomes-based, while not losing sight of our fundamental identity and the role that we play in the state of Montana. Over time, the adjustments described before will give us the flexibility to invest in strategic areas for the future. We're proud of our heritage, and at the same time, we must adapt to the expectations and interests of students, parents, and citizens. Partly as a result of the Academic Alignment and Innovation Program conducted last year by the faculty, and partly as a result of analysis of workforce trends, society needs, and student interest, we'll focus on strengthening our programming in several key strategic areas for the purposes of growing enrollment. Both programmatic and staffing changes must occur in order to accomplish these changes, and they will not happen overnight. We're viewing this academic alignment as a 5-year implementation timeframe, making progress each year on as ambitious of a schedule as our resources will permit. We recognize that our efforts must include both the substantive development of each area as well as the messaging around each area. So the following areas are the ones of focus for our efforts going forward in an enrollment sense. Strategic Area 1, Healthcare and Human Development. UM already has a wide range of programming in this area, and in fact, from the 2-year level to graduate work, we have more programming than any other institution in the state. Examples include nursing, surgical technology, neuroscience, human biology, health and human performance, communication sciences and disorders, physical therapy, pharmacy, medicinal chemistry, toxicology, counseling psychology, school counseling, early childhood development, and the family medicine residency program, and more. Several of those are currently capped programs, and they will be expanded, and some programs will be added, such as physician assistant program, occupational therapy, physical therapy assistant, occupational therapy assistant, and our own BS in nursing program. Strategic Area 2, Data and Computational Science. As a major driver of both the local and national economy, and therefore of considerable interest to prospective students, are the areas of computer science and coding, data analytics, data security, media arts. We have substantial strength in these areas and the potential for rather dramatic growth in our emphasis. We've recently started certificate programs in cybersecurity and data analytics, and we're developing through the School of Business a proposal for a master's degree in data analytics. Media Arts has grown its enrollment in a large measure through their online approach. Strategic Area 3, Business and Entrepreneurship. UM has the premier business school in the region, the only separately accredited accounting program, and the only MBA program in the state. We have excellent core programming in the traditional areas of business like finance, marketing, management information systems, and so on. But we also have some distinctive niche programming, such as the entertainment management program. We'll strengthen our business portfolio by opening this spring the Gilkey Center for Leadership and Entrepreneurship and Executive Education, a companion building to the School of Business Administration, by adding a programmatic focus in entrepreneurship and by growing student-oriented business development opportunities through activities like the Blackstone Launchpad and the Montana Business Startup Challenge. Strategic Area 4, Ecology and the Environment. A great many of our current and prospective students identify with UM's strength and breadth in the areas related to the environment. Indeed, the wildlife biology program, for example, brings in more non-resident students than any other program at UM. Our ecology faculty have been identified as among the most productive in the nation. Our environmental studies program is a regular producer of Udall and Truman Scholars. The Flathead Lake Biological Station is world-renowned. We have an active faculty discussion in progress right now on how we can reconfigure our various environmentally related programs to better attract students and to increase our visibility. We'll continue to grow and strengthen in this area. Strategic Area 5, workforce-specific programs. Several areas involving two-year programming are slated for growth, including welding, nursing, culinary arts, and 2+2 programs in social work, education, and business. These programs are in place or under development with several other two-year programs across the state. These steps won't be easy to implement. I get that. Nobody likes downsizing. But we must do so to keep the institution strong and moving forward. I'm, of course, interested in your feedback, so I'm opening a comment period for the next week on what I've said today, and I'm asking the leadership of the faculty, staff, and student senates to summarize those comments for my review. So it's not me taking your comments, it's the shared governance leadership. You can send your comments to whichever of the email addresses apply to you by next Wednesday before Thanksgiving break. Any changes to the plans that I've outlined here today, then we'll take into account as a result of those comments and announce those changes in early January. Of course, all of the personnel and curricular actions that I've talked about will be conducted in accordance with union agreements, human resource policies, and faculty governance. So let me close with these thoughts, and then we'll go to questions. These are important and impactful changes, both programmatically and personally. But the sky is not falling. We were an exceptional institution when we had an enrollment around 13,000 a few years ago, and we will continue to be an exceptional institution. Quality and excellence abound in our students, our faculty, and our staff. Hardly a day goes by that we aren't recognizing in some way the accomplishments of members of our campus, of our community. As we come through these challenging times, we'll continue to get stronger as an institution. Clearly, we need to all work on this together. So I would ask that you keep in mind this observation. Every one of us at UM is a recruiter. Every interaction you have with a prospective or a current student needs to send the message, we want you here and we want you to succeed. Everyone here is a recruiter. Thanks for your support, and now I would be glad to take questions and comments. Thank you. Come on, somebody has a question. Yeah, Doug.
Oh, yeah. Well, we appreciate your efforts, and we all know what's at stake here. But there's a bigger picture here that we've tried to address several times. First of all, the state of Montana needs a state-based financial aid program for our students. We're one of the few states in the union that doesn't have one. This recommendation has been made over and over again. What this will do is increase the proportion of our high school graduates who can attend our university systems. That's come up in the last two legislative sessions. We need to get that in place, and all of Missoula needs to get behind that. The other thing that we could do to increase our enrollment is appeal to the community. at large. Our local economy, for every 1,000 students we loses $50 million every year ongoing. Loss of 3,000 students is a loss to our local economy of $150 million. A scholarship program for local students to attend the University of Montana would cost about $3 million as a match to a Pell Grant. This is another thing that our community can do to encourage our local high school students to attend the University of Montana. And there are a number of other things we can do. The Board of Regents and the legislature should act to set up a central database and to change the Montana code so that we can set up a central database of juniors and seniors in high school across the state. The Montana code is going to have to be changed to do that. It's a small change. There's a technical glitch that disallows us to contact the high schools and get those lists. But we can get that list. We can build a central database so we don't pay the ACT from 3 or 4 different campuses to get the same list. That way we'd have a central list that everyone can use to compete for students. And that levels the playing field. We can save the university system millions of dollars by doing that. So these are some of the simpler changes that we can do so we can also get the university systems enrollment up, along with the University of Montana. Finally, I would like to see a specific plan from the Board of Regents to address the University of Montana's problems. This should have been done 2 years ago at the very least. No system can call itself successful if half of its entity is failing. So I would like to see the commissioner and some of the regions take some action on some of these things so that we can all move forward. We can compete on a level playing field. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug, for those comments. A lot of good ideas there. The community one is of particular interest to me right now. I do want to have conversations and get a group of people together here to have conversations with Missoula, our host community, which I continue to feel is one of the best assets we have, and we have one of the best community-university relationships of anywhere. But can we improve that even further and most importantly, get that message out? So thanks. Commissioner, do you want to make any comments regarding those other items or think about it for a while? Or?
I can do either. I'm sure I'll get to think about it a long time. Doug, I appreciate that perspective. As you know, we've worked hard to try to get scholarship funds available, and that will be something that we continue to do. That's not been high on legislative priority list. I think that there's some ability to change that, maybe not overnight, but I don't disagree with any of those suggestions. On allowing one side to fail while the other is not, I guess, to be honest with you, I don't know if I agree with the premise to start with. I don't believe by any means that we're failing at the University of Montana, a school that my family's been part of forever, and I'm very proud of, and we'll work hard to make sure that changes like this get implemented fairly, and so we move forward from here. But we also have an obligation system-wide to right-size our institutions. The enrollment has changed, and that's just a fact of life. We have to change the plan to meet that. I think this plan goes a long ways to addressing the changes that have happened and move forward from there. I really like the sort of prospectus on where we go from here over a 5-year plan. I think it will do that. The numbers are not persuasive that the system is failing. We have, as a system right now, more dollars per student funding than we've ever had. The legislature has actually been fairly generous with us in the last 2 sessions in seeing that that is the case. This institution falls under that same category, more dollars per student. It has changed because the student count has changed, and I understand that, and that creates very difficult conversations like the one that you're having today. But the dollars are there for the students that are there, and we have to adjust that to meet the student needs and the student demands that are present. And we go from here, and we build up from there, and I think we can do that. The distribution across the system is formulaic. It's something that when this campus was growing, it argued for vigorously. That formula was put in place. It disperses the money based on an FTE count. And I think that's what we've done now for quite a while, and it makes days like today challenging. But I think as we right-size this institution, there's a bright future. We're not failing by any means, and we won't fail. I completely agree with the President on 2 points. I think customer service is really leading institutions around this country right now. That game has changed a bit from what it was a while ago, and I think this campus needs to be very centered on that moving forward. And I think the statement that you all can play a vibrant part in moving this institution forward is key. I think if everyone pulls together from this day, there absolutely is a bright future, and it doesn't look like it's failing to me at all.
Thanks. Another question here?
Hello, and thank you for coming out. I understand that this is difficult to do because, announcing budget cuts doesn't make anyone real popular with the faculty and so on. And I thought I'd just ask, and maybe this is a question that you've been beaten over the head with already because I saw the protesters outside and so on, but it seemed like a lot of the cuts specifically were targeted at humanities type stuff like poli-sci, anthropology, or humanities and social sciences. And then whereas a lot of the areas that you said were ready for growth were more like hard sciencey or STEM or technical related. And so I'm just asking, I guess, if that's an accurate characterization or if there's more to it than that of your plan going forward.
I think that the programs that were in that category of reduction, they are the programs that are struggling with enrollment. And yes, there is a correlation there to the humanities. And I'm deeply disappointed that that is the case in our country today, that students are not attracted to the humanities the way they were a decade or a generation ago. I think that is somewhat of a reality, and that is why those programs are absolutely staying in place, but we do need to adjust them for the realities of the size of those programs in today's world. The fact is, if we're going to maintain programs such as the humanities, we need other programs that are going to be vibrant and healthy to generate the enrollment. I mean, I think historically programs in the humanities tend not to be the ones that carry most institutions. It is other programs. So we have to have strong, vibrant programs, strong enrollments in some other areas so that we can, as an institution, uphold our responsibility to promote the humanities and fight for the humanities. So it's a very difficult trade-off there in a way, but your observation is not too far off the mark.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
President Engstrom, you and many other administrators have said in the past that MSU's engineering school has pulled students away from Why then are we cutting engineering programs like electronics technology and the award-winning energy technology program that you personally praised in front of the Board of Regents in September?
One, they're not engineering programs. We don't have engineering programs per se. They are technology-based programs, and we're putting them in that category because they're not enrolling students. Clear and simple. We may want those programs, but they are not enrolling students in the kind of numbers that we need. And so the conversation needs to be either setting those programs aside so that we can invest those resources in growth areas, or what can we do to reconfigure those programs so that they are more attractive in today's world. I agree with you. The energy technology program was recognized recently for its outstanding excellence, and I'm very proud of that. At the same time, at least as currently delivered, as currently configured, it's not enrolling students, and we need to make some change so it either does or we set it aside.
Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Valentine.
Hi, how are you?
You didn't bring any shoes with you this time.
No, I can go barefoot if you want, but it's a bit cold outside. Bonjour. What's going on here reminds me of the presidency candidate, the Republican Rubio, said we need less philosophers and more welders. So here we go. We're going to produce more welders and more health practitioners, which is fine. But I don't see the problem since you are trying to outsource University of Montana into the Missoula College. It's not in China, it's right here. Why not create a program where welders, health practitioners, etc., have access to humanities? You could tie up a program together. It's a question of vision, of hard work. It's not impossible. So you won't have to liquidate half of the humanities. It has been going on, by the way, since 2010. A university is not a grocery, a supermarket. Well, we're going to sell what the public want. There's a vision. It's a liberal arts institution, and you are just destroying it. And I'm appalled that most of the faculty don't stand up. Remember the CEO of Air France, these workers tear off his shirt off his back. I'm not saying we should do that, but the passivity, the acceptance is unbelievable. Why not ask for a bailout? This used to be the flagship University of Montana. By the way, you know that in Bozeman, MSU is opening position in philosophy and foreign languages. So they are picking up where we are letting go. And their students, you cannot say, well, it's a question of demographic. Where does their student come? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have three
Bryant.
questions I'm representing the other room. And I'm just going to read all three of them. Two of them are somewhat specific. Why doesn't UM offer financial incentives for long-term faculty and staff to go ahead and retire? Next one is, where should contract professionals direct their comments or questions? We don't fit nicely into any of the categories. And then the third is, this presentation said nothing about how specific enrollment drops lead to specific budget reductions. Can you be more concrete about how our enrollment decline justifies the scope of reductions outlined here?
Sure. I'm going to need you to repeat them one at a time because I didn't remember. So what was the first one, Shannon?
So the first, where should contract professionals direct their comments or questions?
Well, I mean, any one of them, to be honest. It doesn't really matter. I mean, if you get your comments in, that group of people are going to see them. So whichever one you want to submit, I mean, we could always set up another one if you want. But the fact is that the shared governance leadership together are going to look at those comments. So if you send a comment into one of those, it will be seen and read and taken into consideration.
Okay. Next one is, why doesn't UM offer financial incentives for long-term faculty and staff to go ahead and retire?
Okay. One, we have worked with, we have talked to the Office of the Commissioner and our human resources person there, Kevin McCrae. We do not have a mechanism that's available to us to provide financial incentives to retire. And the fact is that most of the incentive programs out there that some other places do have actually end up costing you net money. We have always had quite a nice incentive here at the University of Montana for faculty retirement, and that's something called the post-retirement contract, which provides up to a third of a person's salary to retire. It's not an automatic, I mean, it's an application process, but many of our faculty do take advantage of that post-retirement contract. I have to tell you that that's a pretty rare incentive. There aren't that many institutions that have a post-retirement contract, so it may not be the ideal incentive package in the context of what we're talking here, but it is an incentive. And the third question?
Is this presentation said nothing about how specific enrollment drops led to specific budget reductions. Can you be more concrete about how our enrollment decline justifies the scope of reductions outlined here?
Well, let me answer that first in a global sense. And so in an overall university sense, our enrollment has declined by the numbers I've shown you there. And so we are then using that enrollment change to set the new employee level at the university. So in a university-wide sense, it's exactly tied to our enrollment. In fact, it's maybe more tied to our enrollment than it ever was before by setting those ratios that are student-dependent, that are enrollment-dependent. Those ratios, however, are not intended to be applied at the specific program level. So anthropology, or pick your department, doesn't necessarily have to have an 18-to-1 ratio. That's a global metric that applies to the university as a whole. It will be up to the provost and the deans, again, to work within that set of programs that I outlined to find those numbers. If it happens out of anthropology, that's one way to do it. If it happens out of some other program, that's another way to do it. So the enrollment changes aren't specifically applied to the programmatic level, although the programs listed there are the ones that have seen sort of disproportionate enrollment changes compared to the rest of the campus. Next question.
Hi, Royce. I have two questions. One has to do with structure. The other has to do with budget. The first is, we met with you on November 4th, the Student Affairs Directors, and we had, I thought, a very productive conversation with you regarding the change for a new Vice President for Enrollment Management and Student Affairs. In that conversation, we felt we were kind of led to believe that there wasn't going to be any structural changes until after the new Vice President was on board, and furthermore, in that conversation, you talked about and even asked us for recommendations for what that structure might look like, and we have been working on that, and we intend to present a proposed structure to you. But my question has really, what has occurred in the last 12 days that warrants moving career services and FSSS at this point in time, and what are the efficiencies gained by doing that?
You're absolutely right. We had a great conversation, and in the sense of overall structure of what that new Vice President for Enrollment Management and Student Affairs has, the portfolio that that person has, will continue to be under discussion and will evolve as we look at candidates and so on. There are at least a couple of areas, though, that I think in listening to that group that day and in thinking about that further, that are pretty obvious connections to me. I mean, we have an Office of International Programs and we have an Office of Foreign Student Scholar Services. Both fine offices, they both do a great job. There is a certain amount of overlap, and I think that it's time to make that a more unified approach. And I think the same could be said for career services. But again, Mark, if you and others think that that's absolutely the wrong thing to do, then let me know that, and we'll see where that leaves us, I guess. But there are some, I guess there are just some things that are pretty obvious connections and a way of improving our effectiveness in working with those particular groups of students. So that's where that is for right now.
Okay, thank you.
And did you have a second part?
Oh yes,
Or
I
that was
have
it?
a second. This is going to take a little
Shouldn't have
longer,
asked.
Royce. First of all, I appreciate that there is a plan, and I think that this is great. Speaking for myself, I hope we have the stomach to do this. Now, the reason that I say that is because a few years back, you had a very good plan to start that right-sizing process, and there was some upheaval from a group of faculty. From that point forward, we've had this steady diet of one-time only cuts, and that brings us to what I consider a very, very, very serious place now and next year. But your plan that you outlined addresses next year. My concern is that we have to get through this year. And so I want to talk about the plan that was proposed last year, and then in April at the April budget meeting was changed. So we had a plan last year to take $3.2 million from student affairs, $3.2 million from academic affairs, and $3.2 million from all sectors. Of that plan, it was announced in April that the plan changed, and what we actually did going into fiscal year FY16 was a $5.7 million cut, which meant that we kicked 3.8 into FY16. Now, at that meeting, I asked several questions of the people, of Dawn and Mike in particular. I asked, first of all, what changed the budget projections so that we reallocated funds and that was, what I was told was that was on the significant increase in applications. And I cautioned at that time that it might not be a good idea to make a budget on application versus, say, admitted students or whatnot. But that didn't happen, and I suggested then if we were, and I asked her at that point, so what you're saying is if we don't meet our budget targets this fall, we're going to have an immediate budget impact. Well, we know it's $3 million this semester. I believe, that it's going to be somewhere between 6.5 and 7 between now and June 30th. But that would have been, had we stuck to the 9.6, that would have been a $2.7 million problem that we have to deal with this year versus the 6.5 to 7 that we're going to have to address this year. So my concern is in sticking to this and having the stomach to do what has to be done, because there was some positioning, and the next thing you know, instead of 9.6, we're doing 5.7. And yet, again, we're kicking a problem into another fiscal year. And right now, although you haven't mentioned it, I believe the numbers that I'm looking at would indicate that we might have a $12 million budget problem for FY17. And some of that is the one-time only 3.2 that came from academic affairs. We know we got 2 to 3 million coming in insurance increases. And then we've got this problem that we have now that's going to go into next year. So in terms of a plan, I guess my question is on what numbers, what budget reduction numbers is the FY17 plan based? And are we allowing that whatever fallout from our current situation and our current budget shortfall in FY16, is there going to be any of that that's going to end up in FY17? So that's a long way around the barn, but that's my question.
All right, so thanks. So let me just make a few points. So first of all, what I've talked about here today isn't specifically tied to a particular budget figure that we need to hit. It's tied to sort of this concept of right-sizing the institution, or at least adjusting our workforce for the size of institution that we are. And but these changes will accumulate into some number, some budget number that works for us in FY17. These changes by themselves will go a long way to get to whatever that number turns out to be. Probably not all the way there, but we've got some other things going on as well. We're changing the tuition waiver model that we use for students and so on, as you're aware of. So this maybe isn't the complete budget picture for FY17, but it is the picture for right-sizing the institution. In terms of should we have done this last year versus this year, I mean, I guess that's a good question. I mean, the reality is we are all as interested as we possibly can be in minimizing the impact on our university. And so if we made the mistake of being a little too easy on ourselves last year to try to minimize that impact, then I guess we're guilty of doing that. And now we're addressing it. In the end, had we addressed it last year, I don't know that that would change the place that we are today. I mean, we have a certain number of students today, and we have to have a personnel workforce and a budget accordingly. Whether we did that last year in a base sense or do it this year in a base sense, it gets us to the same place. But we did use some temporary measures last year, as you know, and years before that, to try to, I guess, cushion the effect of this. So guilty of that, I guess. Yeah. All right, next question.
Thanks.
Hello, Linda.
Hello, Royce. Thank you for the open forum and the ability to address this. I appreciate that, and I think everyone around here does. I would like to make 3 brief points. One, I'm concerned, as Professor Valentin is, that the shift to MSU with the liberal arts mission will be definitional for us, and it may be something that we will regret in the long run, because I see that some of the liberal arts programs have been sufficiently downcut because of opportunistic cuts that they are engaged in a kind of a downward spiral. And I hate to lose the kind of liberal arts mission that have traditionally defined us. Secondly, not to belabor the obvious, but I'm concerned that there will be opportunistic cuts because of retirements, and that the integrity of the programs will not be adequately considered. And the reason I mention this is because if you look at the positions that have been cut already in certain key programs, that is absolutely true. And the third point I would make, and again, is that you cite the reason for the faculty versus non-faculty cuts to a 1.4 ratio to faculty. I understand that this is a national ratio. I do understand that, and I also understand that the regulatory burden of various government programs are suffocating us. But still, wouldn't it be great to have a vision where we could cut below that level and lead the nation in doing that instead of following behind? The biggest criticisms of the United States education, as it's been voiced in many journals and editorials, is because of the large bureaucratic overlay. I understand why it's happened, but I would just call on you maybe to take the lead and to try to cut us for us. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if those were questions. I mean, I can certainly respond. There is no question that the number of people it takes to run a university who are not faculty has increased. And it's not all regulatory. I mean, part of it is regulatory. We have also added people, though, in our advising area over time, or in our disability student services over time, or in our veterans office, positions that help those students succeed. And you know, whether we like it or not, maybe in generations past, the faculty were able to be the people who did that kind of advising and counseling and so on. That's not the case so much anymore. And so we have had to think about what other kind of people does it take for students to succeed. Student success is a way bigger deal than it was when you and I went to school. We have a responsibility today to work harder to help those students succeed. And that does take people other than faculty members to do that. So that's the origin of that. So if you're asking me if I'll go out and say, let's reduce that number to 1.0 or something, I don't know if I can do that under the present circumstances. I think that we all have to be, in today's world, keyed in on student success. Does it take 1.3? Does it take 1.4? We can argue that all day long, I guess. But we do need those people. But we did probably ramp up from a quantitative point of view, maybe greater in some of those areas than our student base allows us to do, or has allowed us to do.
I appreciate that comment. I think that everyone in the room is committed to student success, or we wouldn't be here. I just think that there should be a kind of an imaginative, reconfiguration of some of these services on campus. Just as the disciplines have been called on to do this with fewer faculty, I think so should the administration. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
On that same basis, would it be possible when you post your PowerPoint presentation to kind of indicate what the personnel were in 2008, how many faculty, how many staff, how many contract administrators, how many official professionals, and compare it to the numbers in that same category now? That way maybe when people are doing their comments, they have a gauge also to see where the growth has been in the employment and where the growth has been maybe disproportionate, like Linda said,
Yeah.
to where the cuts really need to be made, since we do want the students to stay.
Yeah, we absolutely can do that. We've got that data, so we can put a link to that data up there. So sort of the different categories of employees, pre-recession, peak enrollment, and now. We can certainly do that.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
You bet. You're back.
Hello. Many of the general education requirements that all students are required to take to graduate are in the very humanities departments that are receiving cuts. They're often taught by graduate assistants. Are students expected to be in larger classes? Are there going to be enough of those classes offered? Are the general education requirements going to be changed to reflect these cuts?
Yeah, good question. For the number of students we have, the number of staff and faculty available to us is at least as great as any time in our past. And so while there may be reductions in staffing in those areas, there are also reductions in the number of sections that we need in many of those gen ed courses because we have fewer students needing those courses. In a broad sense, the faculty numbers that we have there are enough to teach, and the number of graduate assistants are enough to teach the sections that we need for today's population. So there shouldn't be a situation where, I'm not guaranteeing there will be no situation, but there shouldn't be many situations where a particular gen ed course in particular isn't available to our students. We may have fewer sections of them, and it may be a little less convenient in terms of the time that you can get that particular course or the section you want. But I don't think at the gen ed level we're going to be in a situation where not having the courses that the students need.
Thank you.
President Engstrom, I live here in Missoula and decided to support the university by enrolling as a returning student. I've also offered my 19-year-old son, who's an enrolled student here.
Do you have any more?
But I have to say, I can't tell you how disheartened I am by this situation today. And I did hear you say that customer service will be a factor. I hope it will be. As a returning student, I can say that the environment has been, for a long time, it took me a long time to get through the admissions process. As a returning student, I didn't feel like I was heard. My needs were heard, were marginalized into things like Molly. I can't tell you, the humanities mean a great deal to people in my stage of life. And I really feel that there's been a lack of, well, I felt like it's been obvious that the university is out after non-resident students, and I do not feel valued as a returning resident here that cares about the meaning of life and the courses that are offered in the humanities. And I do feel that there is an untapped population that could be helpful. So all I can say is it's really discouraging. I mean, if my classes this semester are 200 lecture and a 100 lecture, and I came for discourse on the humanities, and if I'm just going to sit in a lecture, it does push you towards, well, maybe I should just do some kind of online program that caters to that offers more opportunities for a non-traditional student. So I just want to speak in favor of whatever we can do to preserve the humanities, and I hope you will take the customer service to your returning students as well.
Thanks very much for those comments. Just on the non-resident side of things, we actually haven't increased our non-resident student population very much. It's an area that I would like to increase, in fact, because that does help us support the university from a financial sense. But more importantly, it brings intellectual diversity and increased discourse into our conversation. So we have about 25% non-resident students at the university now, and I think it would be good to get that to a higher number. And so we will be looking to recruit more non-resident students. I don't see any way, though, that would keep you as a resident from getting the kind of education that you want. Just the opposite. Having more of those non-resident students would allow us to have a stronger resource base that allows us to offer more courses, more programs, and so on. Thanks for the comment. Yep.
I have three more from the other room. And I'll just read them one at a time this time. MSU undergrad tuition is almost $700 more per year. Why isn't that problem addressed?
Okay, so the fact of the matter is the University of Montana has the lowest undergraduate tuition, entering undergraduate tuition of any institution in the country, any flagship institution in the country, except for the University of Wyoming. So you can take University of and fill in your state, and we are the most cost-effective institution. That has been an historical development. This institution, over many, many years, has taken the approach of trying to keep education as affordable as possible for its students. And we've done that very well. You could argue that we've done that to a fault in that we don't have as much tuition dollars as we would like. The fact is, though, right now, between tuition dollars and state appropriation, we're sitting relatively well in terms of our per student funding compared to what we have been in the past. We do have, I will say that we have ongoing conversations about our tuition structure. Every other May after the legislative session is the time when the regents take up tuition conversations, tuition and fees, and we certainly have a discussion going on about our tuition structure here at the University of Montana. Is it the right structure?
Okay, next is how many retired administrators, whether or not they teach, are on the payroll currently, and will those numbers be reduced, and if so, by how many?
I'm not sure if we have any retired administrators on the payroll. Perry, do you? Okay. Okay, we did, I mean, I guess we have a post-retirement, I put that post-retirement faculty, former dean faculty members on a post-retirement contract. But beyond that, I don't think we have any administrators on the payroll right now. I may be wrong on that, and I'll check, but I don't think that's the case.
Last one is, to clarify, enrollment services were moved from Student Affairs 2 years ago to the Provost's office. Graduate School has now moved to VP Research. Will there be any reduction in the Provost's office since it no longer manages either graduate education or enrollment?
Well, yes. I mean, well, in the sense that the graduate dean line has disappeared, and so that budget is no longer in the Provost's office, or will be no longer in the Provost's office. As the new vice president for enrollment management comes on board and we move admissions, recruiting, and so on from the Provost area into enrollment management, yes, that budget will follow. Those people and their salary will move over to the new area. So yes, the Provost's budget will see that decrease.
Can I ask a question from the back? I just couldn't get up.
Yeah, go ahead, holler it out.
I speak pretty loudly because my practically deaf father is living with me, so this is good practice for that. Can you speak to the role that academic alignment and innovation program played in these cuts?
Sure. So he's referring to a program that we ran last year called the Academic Alignment and Innovation Program. So a year ago, a little over a year ago now, I asked the faculty, the deans, and the provost to undertake an examination of our portfolio, our entire portfolio of academic programs. So the faculty took that charge to heart and did a great job. Andrew Ware, I don't know if Andrew's in the audience here, but Professor Ware coordinated that effort and put together a fine group of people to examine our portfolio. We did this because while we currently have a 7-year review process for all of our academic programs, that is really conducted on a program-by-program basis, and it doesn't really give us the opportunity to think broadly about our whole portfolio, and that's what this AAIP exercise was about. So that group did give to us a final report with a set of recommendations, and I will say that that is part of what informed my thinking on these things. It isn't lock, stock, and barrel recommendations from the AAIP, but it certainly is an important part of my thinking and the cabinet's thinking in terms of where these are going. So it played a very important role, but I don't want to pin these decisions on the AAIP.
I just want to comment that in the whole AAIP process, I repeatedly asked the question how this was going to factor into cuts. teacher, and I've always got the comment that it would not play a factor. And yet when you look at the programs that are targeted, and you look at the programs for promotion, they fit very well in the conclusions of the AAIP. And so the fact that you put this together, unwittingly didn't know that this information was going to be used for this purpose, and yet it's been very clear in this fall semester that it actually was part of it. So in some ways, I feel it's disingenuous in how it was presented.
Well, thanks for the comment. The AIP did not start out and was not intended to be a budget-cutting exercise, and it still isn't a budget-cutting exercise. However, we are now in a situation where we do need to make some adjustments, and I have at my disposal this very thoughtful analysis that the faculty did. I certainly didn't want to ignore it, and so I did read it and take it into account here.
It was not planned from the start that this was going to be timed just before we need to make these budgets?
That's correct.
Never part of the plan?
That's correct.
I find that very hard to believe. I would have appreciated, actually, this being approached from that perspective. Saying we need to collect this information in order to anticipate these sorts of outcomes in the future. Because frankly, it was fairly obvious that they would need to be made. But it just seems like it would. I don't feel like it was honest.
Fair criticism, but it was honest. Yeah.
I appreciate the difficulty of the task that you're taking on here. Although one of your responses earlier to Mark, where he asked you if we should not have begun this process a year or maybe 2 years ago, I find very troubling in the sense that I think the number you had for faculty lines being removed is 50, which is just under, no, it's 25. It's 25 faculty lines will be opportunistically taken away.
Yeah.
Okay. Having spent time on that very committee, the AIP committee, with a number of other faculty, and I would say that our approach was really very honest and open about it. It wasn't about cutting lines from our perspective. But it makes it difficult for me to justify my time on that task force and others when we have these kinds of cuts that are clearly not strategic. I mean, if we had begun this process last year, the year before that, we could have put in place more strategic cuts at a more appropriate level, rather than having to just simply take 25 this year. And so I just make that comment. The other question I have, though, is, are we expecting that enrollment will be lower next year?
We're building a budget for next year on essentially this enrollment, on the number that I showed you, the 10,915. That is the budget. That's the budget projection for next year.
Is the class that's going to graduate this year, is it one of the last large classes that will be graduating and moving out?
I think last year was probably the peak of that, actually. Right. This probably will still be a sizable class for another year or so, I think, yes.
And so, I mean, if we follow with what has been generated in terms of incoming students, by definition, then next year we would be looking at best, equal, more likely a decrease of some sort in enrollment.
Well, we're modeling, Alan, on the number that I indicated there, and that's the best estimate at this time that we have to build a budget next year. As you know, building a budget has some uncertainty associated with it, way more uncertainty today than it did in our kind of steady growth years, where we could say, okay, next year we'll have 1% more students than we do this year, and come pretty darn close. It's been way more volatile than that for the past, well, since about 2007. So we have to arrive at the best budget number that we can, and that's what that number reflects at the present, given all of the knowledge we have at the present time.
And I really appreciate that. I mean, I spend my time modeling behavioral systems, which is always highly volatile. But we have 2, 3 years, 4 years of experience of the model being higher than what it turned out to be. And so I have concerns that we're not approaching the problem in a way that is going to accurately reflect the problem. And so that's just another comment, and I appreciate your response.
Yeah, thanks. So I know that Mike Reed has reconfigured an enrollment management group now that has folks from various disciplines associated with it. I don't know, Mike, if you want to say anything about that, or Alan, if you wanted to provide some specific input into what that process ought to look like, we'd be delighted to hear that from you. If you have something that you think is a better way of making those predictions, then we would love to have that input and have you on that group.
Oh, I can say that I don't have a better way. I model other things. But the last question I have, or comment that I have, is that I noticed that we're going to drop 29 graduate student assistantships. And having been on the AAIP and read all of the comments about what it would take for graduate programs to excel or grow, or some of them just to maintain, the most common comment was, we need more graduate assistantships.
So here's the problem with graduate assistantships. I love graduate students. I was one. We all were one at one time. A graduate assistant costs money. We don't make money off of graduate assistants. They cost money. We waive the tuition for those students, and we give them an assistantship. And so from a crassly financial point of view, every graduate student we put on an assistantship actually loses us money. Now, I know that we're not just about money, we're about education. And providing as many graduate students with an education as we possibly can is what we need to be doing. Possibly can is the operative word there. I mean, at some point we run out of resources, and so we need to use those resources in the most cost-effective way we can. So yes, we could add 10 more graduate students, or we could keep those 29 positions up there. We could say we're not going to touch graduate assistants, let's leave those up there. We can do that, but then somewhere we've got to find, you know, that same number of people, those same number of dollars somehow. So it is a balancing act. It's a trade-off. You know, our graduate students more critical than faculty, more critical than staff. You know, those are conversations that we all have an opinion about, I guess. But at some point, we have to recognize that we have to run a financially balanced institution, and we can't just keep adding graduate students without a funding source to do that.
Again, I appreciate that, but we have to expect then that graduate programs will suffer with a loss of 29 graduate assistantships. And so by removing that, I mean, just so we're all clear, the productivity of those programs will go down, and our ability to teach undergraduate courses, which many of the graduate teaching assistantships do, that's going to reduce as well. As long as we're all clear about the cascading effects of some of these cuts that look good on the surface but are going to have strong impacts.
Well, they don't look good on the surface. None of this looks good on the surface. But the fact is we will still have way more graduate students on assistantships for this student population than we have had in the past. So when we had the same student population in the past, pre-recession years, if you will, we didn't have anywhere near this number of graduate assistantships that we'll still have after making this adjustment. So in terms of teaching the sections for our students, I don't think that that is a valid concern. We have more graduate assistants. We will have more graduate assistants available to do that than we had for this number of students in the past. The comment about the vitality of those graduate programs is clearly a good one. I won't argue with that at all. I mean, you're absolutely right about that. It is a compromise.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity. I wasn't planning on making a comment, but I do want to point out something that occurred to me sitting here. The professor's question regarding the graduate assistantships, if you put that directly behind the first question we received regarding the loss of revenue in the local economy for every reduction in student numbers, it seems to me that responding to the professor's question about graduate assistantships with a kind of a microeconomic perspective. We have these many dollars, we have this many dollars. Those reductions in graduate students, while they may cost the university Nothing. They gain money to the university. They lose money in the local economy. We need to find a solution to the enrollment picture that is macroeconomic, not just micromanaging decline. We need to figure out a way to keep our graduate students, keep them enrolled, attract them, for example, in the English department, which relies heavily on graduate assistantships to recruit graduate students. All of this needs to be macro-managed, not micromanaged. I don't know if you have a response to that, but I would appreciate hearing your perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the comment. I had a talk that had 4 sections to it. The last 2 of those sections were about how we are growing our student body, both in a recruiting sense and in a programmatic sense. So if you looked at those programmatic areas, for example, many of those programmatic areas involve very strong, very healthy existing graduate programs, as well as new graduate opportunities. The PA program is one example of a graduate opportunity. So I just want to say that the first 2 parts of my talk were about managing, micro if you want to, managing our current enrollment situation and the consequent budget reality of that. The last 2 sections of my talk were exactly about what you said. They're about how do we recruit more students and how do we put more long-term programs in place that will attract and be of interest to more students. So thanks I tried to address that in the talk. Maybe I wasn't clear, but thanks very much. Okay, any more? Okay, yeah.
Would you be willing to explain the metric that you use in an academic support category? I'm surprised the library is in that category, and career services, programs that maybe didn't run through the AAIP or weren't informed by that. If you could talk about the metrics specifically that you use for those.
Okay, so the specific metric, Megan, is that trying to establish some logical basis in the gross sense, in the university-wide sense, for the number of support staff or non-faculty staff that we have. And that's where that 1.4 ratio comes from. Again, that ratio is higher than what we had for this student population before, in recognition of the fact that it takes, as we talked with Linda earlier, it takes more people in a non-faculty role to do what we need to do as a university. The inclusion of the library in that mix is, I guess, a decision to ask ourselves, in today's world, does it still take the same number of librarians that it did, a decade ago or whatever? And I know the librarians will have their opinion on that. It's a question I think we need to ask ourselves, and so that's why it's in there. Yes.
Royce, I've got 2 questions. If money is one of the big issues here, the University of Montana and the state of Montana, we have a credit rating, AAA+, and interest rates are at an all-time low right now. If we're looking to a brighter future, can't we bond some money to get us through this time and maintain our faculty and graduate students and TAs? Then the other question is, we've got a summer program that's been nipped at the roots year by year. Summer school is one of our great ways to bring in students who are already here, utilize all the resources, and we don't need that many students to fund a section of a summer class. Why don't we inject a lot of vibrancy into our summer program, because the return on investment is huge there.
Yeah. Thanks, Gary. The first part, can we sort of borrow or mortgage our way out of this? That's kind of what we have been doing for the last several years in terms of trying to, as Mark pointed out earlier, sort of borrow from our auxiliaries and things like that at really 0% interest, I guess you'd say there. So we have been managing this in a bit of a borrowing or a mortgaging situation up to this point, as opposed to base cuts. And so, and frankly, we did that in hopes that what we were seeing in terms of enrollment was a temporary situation that would turn around. It hasn't after 4 or 5 years, and so I think the time has just come to take an approach that isn't a mortgaging approach, that it is a recognition that, at least for the time being, for the foreseeable future, our enrollment is what it is, and we'll work like hell to get that up. But it is what it is, and it's not going to change overnight. So we do need to kind of come to grips with that, I guess. As far as summer school goes, that's a great question. One of the things that has happened in summer that has affected summer school is that the Pell Grant situation has changed for students. So the Pell is the grants that come from the federal government for students to go to college on a need-based. And a few years ago, the federal government changed the distribution of Pell money so that summer courses are no longer eligible for Pell grants. And so that has affected summer school enrollment, not just here, but kind of nationwide. I mean, there's a whole group of students who don't get Pell Grants for summer school. So that has been a factor, maybe not the only factor, but it certainly has been a factor that has been at play. So there is discussion in Congress about that issue, and the higher ed organizations are in fact lobbying Congress to put that summer Pell back in. Clay, do you have any more on that? Did I characterize that pretty much correctly? Okay.
A huge national effort to try to address summer Pell. Sort of the top priority of most think tanks and lobbying groups to return that at this point in time. So I think we're optimistic. We'll have to see.
Okay, it is 5 o'clock or approaching, so why don't we call it quits? I'll hang around if you want to come and talk to me one-on-one, but thank you all for coming today. I appreciate it very, very much.